All right, so I'll share my screen and everybody let me know if they can see the screen. Okay, perfect. So today what we're going to do is we're going to sort of in a very methodical way talk about React in terms of components and props and state as well. So these are things we looked at yesterday, and yesterday we showed you guys how to like build a counter. And so there was just a button and like clicking it increased that value and it was displaying, and sort of another button I think at the end was added that decreased that value. So that's sort of an example. But what we're going to do is we're going to build a very simple app using React. And hopefully we'll be able to show just how much easier it is to do it in React versus HTML, CSS. And so we'll start with just what we want our finished thing to look like. And then we'll think about what is the React way of designing an application. So starting from the finished product, thinking about how do we turn that into components, and then how do we actually code that? And so that's what I hope to do in this lecture. All right, so React, components and props. Let me actually, okay, so I think I have to click the screen. So what do we want to build? So this is actually what we want to build. We want to build a little mini notes app where we can see that we have like we have our notes. So someone has, and like every time you want to write a note, you just basically type it in that input, and then when you click save, it updates those notes. And so that's the general idea of where we want to be in terms of once we're finished implementing this. And so naturally a question arises. So React lets us do this in a component-based manner. And so the difference is that, remember when we were doing in an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we just had to outright write whatever the HTML tags were, and then we would have to have like a separate style sheet linked. And also we would need a script somewhere else, and then we would need to properly link everything in. But now with a component, we can actually have the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript in one file through JSX, which is makes things a lot more straightforward. And so now the difficult part arises. How do we actually accomplish this? How do we build these components, and how do we think in this way of doing it? So the first thing we're going to talk about is just components. And so here we have our page. And so let's think about how do we divide this up into components. And some of the other things we talked about, state and props, that will arise out of us first thinking about components and how they relate to each other, okay? And so there are many ways to perform this division into components, but this is just one way that I did. Okay, so these colored boxes represent components. And I would say if the box is inside of another, that means that that component is inside of another component, okay? So this like orange box, or I guess this light orange, is meant to be the app itself, like everything. And inside of the app, we have a green box, light green box, and a purple box. And so maybe this green box can be our notes. And maybe the purple box is just it's just a component that handles our input. And then all these blue boxes, each blue box is an individual note. So we have a component for every individual note as well that's inside of the notes. Now this will become more clear in the next slide, because what I'm going to do is we turn this into a hierarchy. So this is pretty standard in React. We'll think about, how to break things up. And then we have to think that, components don't exist independently, but they usually have relationships with each other. You remember when we did HTML, CSS, we were thinking about a div might have things inside of it. And so what that would mean is that the div is a parent, and then what the I guess elements that are inside that div are children. So that analogy also applies here. Components can be parents, and components can also have children. And of course, the children can also be siblings if there are more than one. So that'll be more clear here. So here we have our app. So at the start, the app is just going to be everything. I didn't include like the stuff inside the white box, this stuff, just because I couldn't, it was pretty hard for me to minimize these things. But you can imagine it, this app is just everything. And the app has two children. So this app component has two children. One child is going to be the notes, which has the notes, all the notes inside of it. The other child is the note input. So that's a name we're going to give to the component. And the note input is going to be just an input box where we enter our note and the button, the saving button. And then notes has, so I just put one child here, but we will have as many children as we have individual notes. And so each child will just be a note. Like I like banana. So that's one note. Now there would of course be many others, and it'll keep adding more of them. But does anybody have any questions so far on this idea of how I break this up sort of visually into components, and then sort of I arrange them in the structure from parent to child? And yeah, if nobody has any questions, please do write in the chat as well. If everything's okay so far. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this is just like an approach to doing this, but it will make our code a lot easier. So we will be building this. So I'll be coding it out, but I will post these slides and post everything. So like I'll be developing it. You guys don't need to really like code it. You can just like sort of watch what I'm doing and think about certain things, but I'll be working through an example. Exactly. Okay, perfect. So remember that I talked about state and prop. So let's think about that. Like why, like what even are those things, right? So let's first discuss state. So state lets us keep track of things in memory. The idea of state is kind of like in our script.js file, you might have declared something globally that was available everywhere. And I guess that might be the most similar thing, analogous thing I can think of to state. But I think the most important takeaway is that the state, having each component can have its own state. We use state basically, and that stores some information within that component. We can think of it like a memory. We're keeping track of something. And so what are some things that we need to keep track of in this app? Actually, that's a question for everyone here. What are some things that we might need to keep track of? Or better yet, what are some things that might be changing given how we've discussed the user interacting with this? Exactly. So notes, like this list of notes is changing depending on how the user, every note you save is changing. Exactly. That's an excellent example. So that's one type of state that we need to keep track of, notes. Perfect. There's one more type of state, and I'll give you a hint. It's inside this purple box. There's another type of state we have to keep track of. Yeah, the input. Okay, excellent. So specifically the input, it's what we're typing in. Because the idea is, and I'll go more into this later, but so these are two things that we need to keep track of. The input, so what the user is currently typing in, and notes, the list of notes that we have so far, essentially. I see a question here. Is state something new? Concept before in other programming languages. In this context, state is new, but I guess it could be a good analogous, could just be a good analogy for the state to react to what we've seen before, could just be a global variable that stores some sort of memory or some information that is maybe changing. I guess that could be the best analogy. Although we will see how it might be, we'll see how it's different a bit later. Okay, so we have that. We've decided we have two examples of state, perfect, or two states we need to keep track of, the input and the notes. But now we need to think, like, if we have input and notes, let's say in our app at this level, which components need access to the state? So, whoops. I think I just gave the answer accidentally, but let's say, like, okay, let's first think about input. So where might input be relevant in this? I'll give a hint and I'll say it's at the second level. Notes? Okay. That's a good, yeah. So actually, I'll just say here that this is sort of the notes. This state notes, we probably need it here because we want to display the notes, right? Perfect. Okay, text box, exactly. So, and then the input would be here. We want it here because again, like whatever the user is, if the input represents whatever the user is typing, probably as they type it, they should be able to see it in the input box, right? In this, like, as they're entering it, they should be able to see what it is. And of course it's changing. So this provides us a hint as to what props we need to pass down. So it looks to me like we're passing down notes. So this is the idea of a prop, that a prop is some information that is going to be passed down from one component to another, usually from, it's actually going to be passed from parent to child. So app is the parent of notes and note input. And it looks here like notes is passed from app to the child, like child notes. And then the input is passed from this app to the note input here, okay? So that's a bit of a hint. But now we have to think, like, okay, so we have this idea of we're passing parameters as props, basically. We're passing information down from parent to child, and which some children need some information, other children need other information based on what they're doing, so that's okay. But now we're like, okay, wait a second. Aren't these values changing, right? Like, isn't this input, you know, as the user is typing, the input needs to change. Okay, that makes sense. But then also the notes needs to change. And maybe even it's the props and the notes, for sure. So the idea of props, we can think of props as parameters or information that we are passing from one component to another. Exactly, function inputs, exactly. They're basically inputs, things that we pass down. As I think parameter is a good way to think of it, or function inputs as well. So input and notes, if everybody can, hopefully people, I think people can you see my cursor as I'm like circling on the screen? So anyway, the input and notes, okay, perfect. These at the level of app, this notes, like this component notes, is a child of the app component. And so this notes that I'm circling over, this is a prop that I would pass to the child, a parameter. It's some information that's being passed down. Yes, input is an example of a prop that would be passed down to the child note input. So this child, because it exists inside of, and it'll be more clear when I actually code it out, but because this child exists inside of this technically, when I want to create this child, I will need to pass in a prop or a parameter. And what I need to pass in is actually the input. because again, I'm using this input state to keep track of what the user is typing. Okay, so this is what the user is typing or they have finished typing. So that's a prop that will be passed down into the note input. And it'll be more clear why when I actually code it. Information send from note input into notes child. Exactly, right. So when we, all of this, remember from here, maybe if I can go back, this was just a useful analogy in terms of thinking about it. But technically speaking, it actually looks like this on the left. But I changed it to this sort of parent-child relationship just to more easily show the fact that information is being passed down. But the thing is, the actual code looks like what it looks like on the left, because inside of the parent, this app, I will have notes and I will have note input. And so at the level of the parent, we have some information like notes and input. And then we pass those as parameters, what we call props in React. We pass those down to the children, notes and note input. It might be clear with this visualization to see it here, because now we can see like the children exist in the parent in this way. And so now it's more clear that when the parent creates these children, it's passing down props or it's passing information. So I hope that clarifies some of the questions that people have so far about what we mean when we talk about props and like information being sent. It'll also be more clear when I actually code it as well. Perfect. Awesome. So yes, each component does have one parent, but notice how this app component doesn't have any parents. This is like the upper level. I guess it's like the final parent. It has no parents. It's just there. And then the app has two children, notes and note input. And then note input, it doesn't, I just put it here because I just put one child, but technically speaking, it will have as many children as it has these like individual bullet point notes. All right, so this is where we are right now. So now let's think about, because I did mention that some things are changing. Notes is changing, input is changing. So how do we approach that? So one more thing we need to consider, note input and notes. Okay, for sure. So yeah, that's a great question. So what is the relationship between these two? So these are siblings, but conceptually, I think in this app, what we want is that we want when someone types in a note, like in this input box, it updates this input here. So the input, this input, like this blue input, is kind of like a variable. You can think about it. And when you type in your note, let's say I type in the word hello, hello will be stored here in this input. But then again, you can also think because this input is being passed down from the parent, now that hello is actually also up here. It's been updated. And so the relationship between note input and notes is that when I click save, I want my input that is here to actually be added to the notes here. And so because this notes is then being passed down into this notes component, then I want a new bullet point with the message hello. So that's the relationship between note input and notes. I hope that clarifies that. And do let me know if it doesn't, I can explain that again. Alrighty, so let's think about changing values, because we just got into that, to the idea of what is changing and what does it mean for these things to change values. So something we need to consider is that a few things in this sort of structure are changing. Now, notes needs to change on click, right? Because when I click save, I want my notes to update. So that's good. Input needs to change as we type. So as we're typing into this input, the input needs to change. And then when we click save, somehow what we're typing needs to actually be put into our notes. So two things are changing, and they're also differ in how they're changing. Remember when in HTML, like when you add event listeners, remember there was like on click, on change, and like all that stuff? Very complicated, especially implementing it, but we'll see when I implement this. Trust me, it'll be a lot easier, because you don't need to worry about all this stuff like document.add event listener, or like trying to find things by ID, that we don't need to worry about that anymore. Everything is built into React in terms of how we go about making our components, and we'll see that very shortly. Okay, so I just drew these sort of, this yellow arrow just signifies that when we hit save, we want to update our notes. And then this note, as we type it, we want it to update the input. Okay. So but can note take different input from different siblings? Okay. Please do, like, Hannah, feel free to unmute and just clarify your question, because I'm not sure what.
Like here, there is one child for the app for the input. If there is another child for the input, cannot take the input from this both children?
Yes, you can have you can have as many as you want, and you can have them all be updating the same thing.
And it's gonna store all the input inside the props, right?
Do you mean having multiple input components?
No, multiple boxes input.
Oh, okay. So multiple of these, absolutely, yes, you can have multiple of them. And then I guess you're thinking of like having maybe like a form which takes in many things, and then when you click save, it updates.
But it's gonna be with different component, not the same component.
You can put it in the same component, and you can. So I'm thinking, like, I guess if you have a form where you have the name, username, password, right? Or like, you maybe remember the contact form where it's like username, email, message, right? Those are three states you're keeping track of that are being updated in the exact. So we'll see that, and maybe I can make some changes to the Notes app as well, like just to look more into that.
Okay. But each component has one parent. It cannot have two parents.
Each component only has one parent.
Like the note just have app as a parent, but there is no other, let's say, child for the note gonna have a parent as a note and app.
Okay. So actually, components can have more than one parent, and we can think about, like, let's say if you make a component that is a button, you can use that in many different places.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So, and that's actually the one of the most powerful things in React, is that you can sort of make all the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, like all that in one component, like a button. And then you can just use that button. You can call it wherever you want in your application. You don't actually need to redo the code like we had to do on our, HTML, CSS, where you had to rewrite the same code many, many times. So we don't need to do that. Okay, so I see someone has a question. Data does not pass through children. It depends. Actually, here's a good example. So, and we'll see this in code. I didn't actually write it here because it's not state. But the data that is here in notes, each note, this data note, like an individual note, like I like bananas, that text is actually being passed down to its child note. And we'll see that when I actually code that. We'll see that in more clearly. Okay, let's get to implementation. Can I exit that? Okay, there we go. Okay, so here we have our notes app. And let me CD into this. And let's see, how do I run this? What's going on here? NPM start. Okay, so I've already I use that create React app command to get everything running. But I will be deleting a lot of things inside of this because I don't really need them. Do that shortly. Yeah, there's no data directly passing from note input into the notes component. Exactly. Maybe I can. There's no data from here to here passing or from here to here. These are both siblings. And it's not that it can never happen. It's just that in this example, we don't have it. Now, of course, it might be different depending on what you're trying to do and what you want to build. It can definitely be different. But in this case, yeah, there's nothing passing between siblings. Okay, so this is the React app. Let me actually move that there, put that here. Okay, so I will clarify something and we will see it more clearly when I code it. The data is not actually being passed to the parent. The data originally exists in the parent only. So input and notes exists in the parent. It's actually being passed to the children and being updated in the children. Or well, it'll be more clear. Yeah, what's actually happening is even the update is being done in the parents as well. But so we'll see how it's actually implemented, and it'll clarify this idea a bit more. Yeah. Okay, so this is where we are starting. So, but I don't need all this stuff here. So let's get rid of all this. Let's start from a blank slate. Okay. Now it'll probably get rid of that. And let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, it'll give me some errors. Let's go here. Okay, let's get rid of that. That. And I think we are finally in. Okay, so I don't need. Maybe. Let's see here. This is app. Just so. I'm just gonna put 10 pixels. Just so that should. Oh, okay, that's not. I just want a slight margin. Okay, wait, let me see what's going on here. Okay. Oh well, we'll worry about the design later. Well, let's not worry about the design right now. So the main idea, perfect. So we have that, and I will update these changes. So notice how I have two terminals open now. One terminal, I'm actually running it, the application in real time, and then the other one, I'm gonna do my commits. Here, okay, perfect. So I just deleted a bunch of stuff that I don't need. So I'll just say here, removed a bunch of unneeded starter stuff. There we go. Okay, so I made that commit. And let's see here. We have all these components. Okay, so I think the first thing I will actually explain is like this index.js. So if we actually go into our, it should be here, index.html. So this is actually the page that is being loaded here. It's this page. And I think the most important thing to bring up is that notice how you see this div here, ID is equal to root. This, what React does is it's going to basically take our React code, our app, and inject it into this here. So, and I'll show that here. So this is actually like this is the only place, I guess, where we're actually worrying about document. And this is basically given to us. See how we say root. So we are going to use this React library, and you don't need to worry about the implementation, but this is just the idea of how we start off, is that we create a root. So we're actually getting this root element here. We create a root, and then we render it with React, and we put the app inside of that. And that's actually why our app is like, we can see this here, this like blank slate. It's why we even see it on the page. Because what React is actually doing is it's hiding away all the complexity from us. But at the level of the computer, it's sort of saying, okay, all these components are really just can be simplified into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so it handles sort of expanding these components back into the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then putting everything in just into here exactly. And so then it just becomes root.render, and then there's just a bunch of HTML here, or JSX. So yeah, we don't need to worry too much about that yet, but it's just this idea that a lot of how the computer, like how the website is reading this, is just pure HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so it is, we might write it like this, but when it renders it, it's just going to look like this, essentially. Okay. All right, so without further ado, let's get started on actually coding. We don't need to worry about that. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make a new folder to hold all my components. And I'm going to move this here. Now, I'll probably get an error here. And that's just because this path, I have to change this. Let's see here, component/app.js. We're attempting to import which falls outside of, okay, maybe I need to, this was working just a moment ago. There we go. Exactly, yeah, we can think of it in that way. It's kind of like it's returning it. Did I? Oh, whoops. Okay, this is supposed to actually be inside of that. Yes. Okay, there we go. So it wasn't working because I think there were some issues where I was putting it. So anyway, so all I did was inside of my source, I just made a new folder called components, and I'm going to put all my components there, basically, just to make it a bit more clear what are the components. So I'm going to say here, added components folder. Okay. All our code, we're basically just going to develop it in here. All right, so let's first think about it. Like, I remember I mentioned that we need some state. So maybe I can, I think what we'll do, I'll just have this open here. And so we need state. And so how we do that is we're actually going to, there's something called use state. So I think it would be like that, the import. Okay. So what use state lets us do, it's basically how we create the state. And so let's see here. Let's actually do this constant. So the first state that we're going to think about that we need essentially, we need our notes. So this is the format of how we do this. So that's just sort of the syntax where this first thing is just what represents the state itself, notes. And this is sort of, you can think of it like a built-in function that updates our state. And so we're just going to call it set now. Now we can call it anything we want. We can say set X. I think it has to have, okay, so it doesn't even need to have set inside of it, but just for simplicity, it's always good to just call it, if this is notes, it's good to call that set notes just so it is clear, you know, what it's doing. And we can even, so this is actually when I say use state, and then I put this in, I'm saying that it's an array. Right now it's an empty array, but if we want, we can actually add some things here. So it starts off with some initial values. So let's do that. Let's see here. So we had, I like bananas, I like banana bread. Okay, so I like bananas, I like banana bread, and let's just say hello from Canada. Okay. So that's what our state will start as. And I think if we want to here, let's just console log this so we know it's working. Okay, perfect. So we can see here that it is console logging. Good. Yeah. So that's our notes. Now let's think, we also need something to represent the input. So let's just call that input and set input. Let's say that's just an empty string for now. Okay, so now I think the first thing that we can do is let's just try to get it to display our notes without worrying about the input for now. Okay, so let's create a notes and believe that is the syntax for that. Let me just double check in my note. Okay, so I could do it like that, but I think what I'm going to do is I will have the same structure here. Notice how I have function app and then export default. So I think I'm just going to change this to also sort of match that. We're going to have our notes. And then for now, let's just sort of, we'll make a div inside of that. So wherever I call this notes, it's just going to return what's ever inside of here, right? And I'm just going to say notes. And let us add an let's add a header one, and let's just say notes. Okay, perfect. And then here, let's just do export default notes. So what this is doing is just saying that this, wherever I import this file, by default, what I'll get from the import is just this function. And all the function is doing is it's returning this here, okay? So if I put notes here, what will it output? Now I save that. And notice how now I have notes here. All right. Does anyone have any questions so far about why are we seeing notes here? Now I'm seeing here invalid properties. I'm going to change it to class name. Yeah, so here, I remember in HTML, you can just write class, if I remember correctly. But here, you need to specify like class name. It's just a little bit of a difference. All right, so is everyone okay with, does anyone have any questions? If not, just like type yes in the chat if I should continue from here. All right, so I guess I'll take the silence as a sign to continue. So now all I've really done in this notes. Okay, good question. So this notes just keeps track of the status. You mean state or? Okay, so this notes is just the notes themselves, basically. It's sort of built in. So this notes will just be this. Set notes is a way for us to modify those notes. Okay. So if we were to do this here, if we were to do something like set notes, we would pass in the new state, whatever we want it to be. Now, because I've described notes, when I say this notes, like set notes, when it equals this, I'm just saying that by default, I want my notes to be an array with these 3 strings inside of it. Okay. Now, whenever I call set notes is a sort of, it gives us a way to modify that state, and it's sort of built in. You can think of it like a function that we can use to change the notes. And so that's the difference between notes and set notes. And yeah, the idea of a state, we can just think of the state as sort of like memory. It's a way to keep track of something. That's, yeah. So here, I'm saying I want to use a state called input, and I will modify it by using this set input. And when I say use state and this empty string, I'm saying that I want the state input, so input is a state, I want it to start as an empty string. Okay. Yeah, so we'll get to that as soon as, so we'll get to, so first we're just, I think we'll get to that when we actually implement the note input. But for now, other than that, the idea of set notes is everything else clear though, like how I'm calling notes here and why I see this sort of header here, right? Because I have the header here and I'm returning it here. So is that idea clear? Yes, so we'll get to that. So let's continue. So one thing that we need, I'm realizing, is that we need to have, well, imagine we want this notes, you know, kind of like here. I just wish I could sort of minimize this on the side, but notice how here we want this like notes to actually have all the notes inside of it. So this is the idea of using a prop. And so what we're going to do now, I could just write props. That's fine. But I think for now I will type, yeah. You can write props, but actually what I'm going to do here, in curly brackets, I'm going to write notes. And so what that does now is here, what this means is that this notes is taking an input in, and it's taking an input called notes. Okay, so I'm just calling it notes. And so here, where I call this component, where I sort of have it here, I will pass in an argument. It's almost like in a function you pass in arguments. And notice here, this notes. So this notes is basically this here. And I'm going to pass in this notes in here. So again, the names are not really that important. I could call this X. But if I call that X, then I need to sort of have the same declaration there. But just for, I don't want to get the, I want the name of the parameter or the name of the prop to represent actually what it is. I think we'll just call it notes there, and we'll call it notes here. Okay. Now to see if this is actually being passed down, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to here, I'm going to put a console log for the notes, and I should see it here exactly. Okay, perfect. So the fact that I see an output here, what that means is that the notes from here, this state exists in the parent and it's properly being passed down to the child. So the child has access to these notes. Right, so the reason I'd say not worried, I guess I could go into that, but the reason why I have this notes here is because we can think of the parameter that's passed down is actually an object. And so when I do this, it's something called destructuring. I'm breaking apart the object. But for now, let's just say that that's just a syntax thing. The reason why I do it like that, it's just that's just how it's sort of done. We can go more into sort of why that is later. But for now, that's just sort of how we do it. Okay, so perfect. So I have my notes. I have my note here, but now I want to actually display these notes. I think let's think about it. What's a good way we can do that? So I remember here, what I did was I said, okay, let's just make these individual notes. Inside of notes, this notes, many notes component, I will have many children, and each child will be a singular note. So let's actually implement that. Let us create now note.js, okay? And let's, for now, let's just copy this into here, and then I'll just change this. Change that. Change that. Get rid of that for now. Nope. And maybe that's a hint there. I want to pass down I want a single note to be in this note, and I actually want to, well, we'll leave it out for now, but we won't have anything there. Let's just console log our node. And now we need to sort of figure out, how do we actually do that? How are we going to pass that information down? We have the information here, so now it's just a matter of passing it down. So one thing I can do is I can call, so I have the notes here, and this is, again, this is a syntactical thing, but you would use these curly braces to actually write JavaScript inside of this. And I will take this notes and I will use map. So remember what map does. So map is a callback. And what map is doing is it lets us, inside here, it lets us declare a function that is going to be applied to every element inside of notes, basically to every note. So here, and I can, the value is just going to be the note, it's going to be the string. And what I will do here is I will just say note. And I will, because I've declared this, it's going to take in one thing here, I can just say here, note equals note. And if I save that, well, it says note is not defined. So let me actually first fix that up here. I need to do an import. Now see this, I like bananas. Now I'm not sure actually why it's printing each twice. I think that is an issue with the rendering. But notice that it is printing basically our notes. And it's printing it because here we are calling, so we're over here, we're mapping over every single note in this array of notes. We're taking the value for every one of these and we're creating a new component. We're passing in the note as a prop into that component. And then at this level, we just console log that. Okay. I'm going to do a few changes to this just so we see it on the screen. And then I'll take up some questions about this. So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to make this a list. So let's do that. That's the first thing I'm going to do. And then one more thing I want to do is this guy. Let's just, so we know that we get the note, and I think it'll be clear if here, I'll actually make a list item. Again, because it's JavaScript, I need to actually use these curly braces. All right, and now we actually see the 3 notes inside of there. Okay. All right, does anyone have any questions so far about sort of how we went through that? Uh-oh, okay. Maybe let's... All right, so this note here, basically this and this, these are just components that I'm making, right? So let's ignore note for now. Let's just ignore this for now. Let's just think about these notes, right? Does everyone understand the idea of me having a state in my parent? So let's, the first thing, and please write in the chat, yes, right? And if you don't understand it, no. Does everyone understand the idea of me having this state here where notes represents a list of 3 notes and each note is a string? Okay, perfect. So that we've got that down. Okay, good. Does everyone understand the idea of, let's ignore this. If I just have this notes component, like why I see this header here. Does everyone understand that idea? Let's actually just ignore, let's ignore that for now. The idea of like me calling notes here, and let's ignore this as well. Okay. And me being able to see, okay, so that's good. So yeah, so does everybody understand the idea? And if you do, yes, and if you don't know, that's fine, because we can then take that up. Yeah, so this idea of having notes, I can call notes here inside of this, my div, and then seeing this H1, seeing it here. Does everyone get that idea? No, okay, good. Now I know where to cover. No, it's okay. It's okay if you don't understand it, because there's a lot going on. So I think it's easy for me to show here what the HTML looks like, because what this React is doing for us is it's actually, all the HTML is still there. It's just sort of hidden from us. Okay, so does everyone understand the idea that this, what I've highlighted, is HTML, right? So this, what I've highlighted is HTML. This function, this it's a component, but let's think about it in this context as a function. This function is returning this HTML. Is that clear? That this is going to return something that eventually is just HTML. Right? So is that idea clear? Okay. Now let's think about this. So this function is returning HTML. App is calling that function. It's a component, but it's also a function. It's a functional component. That's the correct term. Let's not worry about the parameters just yet. Let's just worry about, let's ignore the parameters that this parameter I'm passing in. Let's just ignore that for now. let's just think about this case. So does everyone understand this idea of, at this level, this notes component is a function that returns some HTML, okay? My parent app calls this function yes. Well, not quite. So it's not printing notes. Actually, no, it's not printing notes. It's returning HTML. It's returning this HTML. Div class name notes, h1 notes, and h1 inside of it, okay? In app, I'm calling this notes, and that's why this looks like this. Notice how app has the class name app, and then inside of it, I have div class equals notes, and then the h1 notes. It's because I'm calling this component, which inside of it has its own HTML. And so when I call that, it just takes this, it returns this to here. So it's like when the computer is when the browser is evaluating this, the reason why I call it in tags, that's just the structure of React. It's because, yeah, that's just how React does it, that this is in tags. It's why I don't, like, for instance, do that. But we can think that's just a React specific behavior, but it's kind of similar to calling a function. And this, the fact that I call it when it returns, it's pretty much just going to look like that when it returns. So is that idea clear now? Like why I actually even see that there, and what it means to actually invoke, what it means to call a component in that way, what it actually means to write that. Okay, perfect. Exactly. It's just like a bunch of HTML. Essentially, that's the best way to think about it. It just sort of, it abstracts away, it takes away all this HTML, so we don't need to worry about it. Because it's the same thing as us writing this, basically. But then now, to make things simpler, we can take that, we can put it inside this notes here, make sure that we are returning it. And then we can just call that here notes. It makes our lives a lot easier doing that. So see, now you can sort of see that it is a lot of the work when it comes to HTML and CSS. It simplifies the amount of code that we need to write. Because now I can take my HTML and I can sort of put it in separate files, and I can now reference those files. So that's also another way of thinking about it. All right, so is everybody clear on this idea so far of like sort of where we are when it comes to this? And like why, I guess I'll have this on the side here. It's really good to have this. Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna make one small change actually. I'm gonna get rid of all of this just so these comments, we don't see it on the side. It doesn't like crowd up this area. Okay, awesome. So now let's think about passing a parameter. Okay, so this is how it's different from a function. Well, it's different, but it's similar to a function. We can think of these as just functions. I think that's probably a very good analogy. They're a bit more complicated because functions, we also have this state and things like that. But for now, let's just think of this notes as a function. When we call it, it's going to return some HTML here, and it's the same HTML that we see here. That's actually why we see it, okay? So now let's think about the props that we're passing down. Okay, so everybody does understand so far that we have notes in this app component, right? This is like the parent. And the notes is just an array. Okay. So far, okay, so that's good. So now we sort of understand this idea where notes is an array, and this array has 3 elements. Each of these is a string, right? So now let's think about props. We're going to be passing something down. And I think actually, to make things simpler, let's just use props like this. And I know that in the previous lecture, it was just introduced like that, right? So that's fine. The thing is, I want to just do this because I think it makes it clear. It's going to make it clear for us a little bit later on in this lecture when we have multiple things being passed down, it'll be a bit more clear. So if I do this, the analogy of the function and passing parameters into functions will be more explicit if I do it this way. So this is just a syntactical thing. Don't really worry about why, but just sort of for now, just accept that within these curly braces, we will pass these parameters. So this notes here is going to take one parameter for now. Call it notes. It's going to be the list of notes, okay? And here, if I want to pass that down, I will actually need to say, I'll need to like, this is what I'm passing down, basically. And I will need to say, okay, this notes that I pass down, it's going to be this is the notes I'm going to pass into that, okay? Now here, maybe I can write this here. If I have a function add, and I take A and B, if I do this, it's kind of similar to that. So does everyone see this idea of having this function? Maybe I just do here, A plus B, right? So this is some function. Here I have these 2 parameters defined, and here I'm calling it, okay? It's kind of like this notes. Here I've defined it, and it's accepting notes. And then where I call it, kind of like how I sort of have 1 and 2 here, I need to say notes equals notes. So this notes that it takes in has to take in input. What I'm passing into that is going to be this. Now maybe I can make it more clear by saying, let me change that, set. I'm just going to change the name so it's a bit more, the difference is a bit more clear. There we go. So now notes here, my notes, right? This is just to show that these 2 are actually different, okay? So does everyone sort of understand what I've done so far with that? Or does anyone have any questions about that? No questions? All right,
Sorry,
no.
question about the can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
What would you call the notes itself? Is it a variable? Like where you have notes equal my notes, what would we call the notes? Is that a property or is it a variable?
Props, parameter.
It's
You
a
can call it a parameter, so it's something that is being passed into this notes.
Okay.
Props is like the technical React way to talk about it. So for sure. So I'll just repeat this. So all I did, but everyone does understand the idea of having what it means to even to write notes here, right? Okay, good. Okay. The idea of props is just like passing parameters. It's like passing information. So just passing, when I'm talking about props, you can just think of it like it's a way for us to pass information from the parent to the child. That's all it really is, okay? And so when I say here in notes, So when I have this here, it's kind of like, you know, if I declare a function add and I put a and b, just going to return a plus b, right? It's almost the same as that. It's just like this to this. You can think of like this notes is analogous to this a. It's kind of like a parameter. It's saying that this needs to be inputted wherever I call it, right? Because if I call add, I need to put in, like, I need to say what these are, or even better, maybe if I just say, right? So let's just worry about this concept, okay? Just where we are right now. So does everybody understand this idea that me having notes here is the same as if I were to define a function here? Here I say a, here I say notes. I'm just saying that it needs to be passed in, basically. It's some information that needs to be passed in. Okay. Now, in the parent, when I declare, so when I call this component, yeah, I think the names are confusing, but my component is also called notes, okay? The component takes in something, this notes here. So I just write notes, and then I need to say it's what it's equal to. So what value is it actually taking in? My notes. It's taking in this array. This array is being passed in to the child. And this will be more clear if I console log here. If I console log what I'm going to pass in, notice here I can actually see it. Now, if the names are confusing, I think that's okay. If you want, I can change this to X. And then I'll just make this set X. And then I'll change this to Y and set Y. And then I'll keep this as if that's okay, I can keep that as notes. But it would also just look like that, basically. So I just changed the names just so it's a little bit clearer. There's no confusion there. For sure. So then I'm passing in, and notice how, like, okay, this is still gonna stay. This is just the notes. And here I'm saying this equals X, which is this array. So that array is being passed in as a parameter into that component, or I guess you could say as a prop. Yeah. Okay, so I do think we should continue because I do want to complete this implementation. So let's continue to the next part. And I think the next part will re-solidify this idea of passing down basically props. So now let's think about note. Okay. So we have our note now. So in notes, this is good. I have notes, and I'll just say here, notes is an array. And notes is an array. It's just going to be an array, like I like bananas. What else do we have in it? I like banana bread. Okay, let's just make it shorter. Hello from Canada, and hello from France. So our array will have two values, hello from France and hello from Canada. Okay. So at this level, inside of notes, I can add a console log and I can see what I have passed down from the parent to the child. Let's do that here. Okay. If I rerun that, see here that I can actually see it there. Okay. So that's just this. I'm passing that down to the child into this notes parameter. The notes parameter, how I've specified that is I've specified it here, and here I'm console logging it. And notice that this is basically going to be that. X. Okay. All right, so now let's think about how do I actually display the notes? I want to display all the notes. So we could individually, we could make a bunch of notes. We could do this, right? We could just make a bunch of note and then for each of these pass it in, but it's kind of that will make things really complicated. And also it's not dynamic because, you know, naturally as we add more notes to our app, like as we keep saving notes, we would need to keep adding like multiple components, right? So we want it to be done in a more dynamic way. And so what we can do is the following. What we can do is we're going to use, this is why JavaScript was very important to, we covered that in the beginning. Curly braces are just to sort of tell our browser that this is going to be JavaScript code. And so what I can do here is I can notes, right? And notice how this notes here is this here, right? So let's remove that. I do notes dot map, and let's first just describe what is happening here. Okay. So what this is doing is it's going to, this map is running this function, I've highlighted it, for every note. It's running it once. Okay, so if I save that and run that, so whoops, I get these. Now I don't know, let's ignore this. I think this does not have to do with map, has to do with sort of rendering. But let's just look at these two. So notice that it's actually printing both of these values. Hello from France, hello from Canada. So what this notes.map is doing is it's basically saying, okay, whatever is inside of this map, I'm going to run that once for every, basically for every element inside of this notes. So we use map because what map does is, what this is actually doing is it's returning, well, it'll be more clear when we change it from a console log. But what map is doing is that it is going to be returning a new array. And that'll be more clear because for each does not return a new array. It just returns, it just sort of runs a function for each value. But map returns a new array. And that's actually important because, and I'll show it here, when we want to render this, so we will actually do this. We'll call note, okay? And then here, I have this note, right? This is just, maybe let's just call this message. This is message, or even better, text. Text. And then here, what I'll do, text equals note. Okay, so the reason we use a map is because this whole thing is actually going to return an array. And it'll actually look like, if I use for each, it doesn't return that. But what this will look like when it actually executes is it's going to look like this. It's the same thing as, oh God, excuse the bad formatting. It's going to look like this. And maybe I can copy this and yeah, it's going to look like this. Okay. I will be right. Let's just take like 5 minutes and I would just say, when I come back, we'll take this up, but this will evaluate to this. So I think that idea is very important here. Yeah, so let's take like 5 minutes, just a short 5 minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll sort of continue where we left off here. But I think this idea is pretty important. Because again, remember that this note, I'm calling this here, I'm calling this on every element inside the notes, hello from France, hello from Canada. I'm calling this. So in the new array that I create, for every note, I'm actually going to be returning this component, which is supposed to return this. And so that's why this will actually turn into this. And that's why it renders here, but I'll just leave this on the screen. And we'll take a short, let's say, 5 minute break. Also, feel free to write any questions down. So I think when we come back from the break, I can take those up for so far what we've done. I think it actually is a great question why we don't use for each, because it's quite important. Yeah, let's do that. Let's see what happens if I do. Let me comment this out. I'll just show you what happens if I do that. And notice how nothing is returned. And that's because for each does not return anything. For each just returns, it actually returns undefined. So we're not actually returning what we create here to anything. And that's why we use a map, because, and that's even why I wrote this here. I think, yeah, no, it'll actually render twice now, but because I've put that there. But essentially, what this is returning is this. Because again, the notes.map, so it returns an array. And it's returning an array of these note elements, each of which is just going to be this, because I've defined what I want the note to look like here. Yes, exactly. So note is a child of notes, and notes is a child of app. And you know, that's the thing. It's like, notice how, let's not worry about that for now. Let's go to elements. You see, like, the app is just rendering. So maybe we'll start at the very bottom. This note is saying that return this, right? So this function here, this map, it's basically saying, okay, I want to map, I want to go over every element in this array of notes. So notes, remember, this is an array of strings. Hello from France, hello from Canada. And what this is saying is this map is like, okay, I want to go over every element in this array. Hello from France, hello from Canada. And then I want to return a new array where for every of those elements, I take that string note and I replace it with this here. This note, text equal. So again, I guess I can just, maybe it would be easier if I call this value, okay? So I take the value and then I replace it with this note component. And the note component looks like this. With this is being text. And again, here, notice I'm saying text equals value, okay? And then here, have that there, that text. So that's actually why it looks like that. And notice here, even I could really go into this, and now I can see here, hello from France, hello from Canada. And then inside of the notes, I have notes, and then I have these two. And then inside of app, I then have the notes. Right, so. So yes, I can do the same thing with one child, but the problem with that, actually, sorry, can you feel free to unmute and just clarify that question?
Like I don't have to send because the notes taking array. So I can like break this array to many index, let's say, and present it on the screen on what in this function without calling another child to do that, right?
Exactly, yeah. So you could just take this and you could put that here.
Oh, yes.
And you could make that. And I think, let me comment this out just so it doesn't display.
Okay.
And notice that it also appears. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's probably, I think for this app, it's better that we do it this way, just because when we make things more complex, like maybe we want more things inside of the note, not just the text, right? Maybe we want buttons for doing other things with these notes. So that's why we do what we did there.
Okay, but any JavaScript, we put it between curly brackets, and
exactly.
any
So
HTML, we put it between this is greater than and less than, right?
This greater than and less than is to call a component. The actual HTML, it looks like we're using these brackets, the non-curly, just the these like sort of these brackets.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so let's continue from here. So yeah, I think this is really important, this idea that this just turns into this, basically, right? Because again, does everyone understand this concept of, and feel free to type yes or no, and maybe I can try to re-explain it as well. Just this idea of what it means for me to say nodes.map and then sort of do this here. For sure. So, all right, because we do want to finish. We might go a little bit over, but I think that's okay. So, yeah, so the idea, what I'm doing in this map function, and so what I'm doing when I say notes.map is, remember, in curly brace in JavaScript, it's just saying that on this array with 2 values, I'm going to create a new array. All this map does is it just returns a new array. But what I put inside of this map dictates how I want to change each value inside of that. Okay, so when I say this, and again, I just put it in array. I don't need to do that. But again, this is just a representation. So let's get back to this concept. Basically, whatever I put between these inside of this map, this is just like a function. All it's doing is it's being called on every element inside the notes. And it's just replacing that with this by default. Okay, so when I map over this notes, it takes the value, and the value is just each element. So the value, when the first time it runs over through this, the value is going to be hello from France. The second time it runs over this, the value is going to be hello from Canada. And all I'm doing is I'm creating a new array where I can change those values. Okay. Now, when I say value and I put this and I say note text equal value, what that is doing is it's basically gonna, we can think of it like this at a higher level. It's kind of just like doing this. Hello from France. Hello from Canada. Okay. Is that idea clear? So it's actually, when I do this, it turns into this. Okay. And remember, each note, so now that's what it looks like in sort of the intermediate step. Each of these notes, remember, is going to look like this. So every time I call that, it's going to return, it's going to be this function, which takes in the text and it returns this, basically. Exactly. It returns this. Each note returns this, basically. The note component is returning this basically JSX. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So why did I use map? That's an excellent question. So the reason why I use map is because the notes that are inside this array are just strings, but I want to turn them into components. I want it to be an array of components, not an array of strings, or better yet, I want it to be an array of HTML. Okay, so when I do this, instead of it just being hello from France and hello from Canada, I get a new array that looks like this. That's the intermediate step, right? Exactly. I'm using map to change them to components. Exactly. And remember, each of these notes, maybe I can move this here. Oops. Maybe that will be a little bit clearer. Each note looks like this. So this text, hello from France, it's going to be rendered here. And again, I put this in curly brackets because this is a JavaScript that is being passed in. But it's going to return this, each node. So that's why, again, this turns into this, and then it actually turns into this. So this note with the text becomes this. Class name note, list item, hello from France, and so on, okay? And it becomes that because, again, I've declared what I want the note to look like here. And so, of course, eventually, all of this is actually what it will eventually look like and what the parent will see it as. And that's why when we actually inspect this and look here, it looks like this. with the list items and so on. Okay. Can we remove div? Yes, we can. We can. So if we want, we can remove this div, and let me actually, so I guess they are written in something called JSX, which has HTML inside of it, but it also lets us write JavaScript as well. And the reason the JavaScript that we write, we specify it in these curly brackets. But we can think of it as basically HTML because, you know, it's using all these HTML tags that we are familiar with. Yeah. Okay, perfect. All right, so let me just, so is everybody okay with me removing this here? Deleting these? Okay. I just like, that's not like, I just wrote that because that's sort of like how the browser is going to evaluate it in terms, and then get the final outcome, which is actually going to be this. These are just like intermediate steps from the computer will like take this, turn it into this, and then turn it into this. Yeah, no worries. All right, perfect. No, it's always good. I mean, I think explaining it this way, it's also good for me just to sort of think more about like what is happening step by step in terms of how it's seeing it. So I think it, you know, it is good for me to explain it as well. Yeah. Okay, so I will leave. Okay, so I will leave them, but I will comment them out because I don't want them actually, and it's okay, I'll comment them out, but what I'll do is when I post these files up, you can uncomment it and see that, yeah. Because I don't want to, I don't want this to like render, it's gonna, if I left that, it's gonna basically, we're gonna see like 6 notes instead of just 2. So, okay, perfect. Yeah, of course. All right, awesome. So we are there. So now we're, you know, we're actually maybe like halfway done in terms of implementation, because now we have our notes, perfect, and we are displaying it. So that's totally done. So now I'll say here, I added a comment that includes the perspective of the browser in rendering the JSX. So that's this bit. Okay. Okay, perfect. So let's think about, now comes the harder part, which is actually trying to think about our note input with the button and like what that's going to do. So let's get to that. Let's make a component here. Let's call it note input. Or you know what? Let's just call it input.js. Okay. And I'm lazy, so I'm going to just take this and copy and paste that there. I need to, that's fine. Of course, let's change these names. So let's just change this to input. Let's get rid of that. There's nothing that's going to be passed in right now. And let's just, here, I'll just call it note input. Okay. And this is, let's just for now say, or add a note. Okay, perfect. Export default input. Okay, and then now let's just import it here. So now here we'll do input. And see here, add a note. And here, this is our input. Again, because we're just returning this to the app. So it's kind of just like, if I were to just take this, copy it, and paste it there. Because now if we look here inside our app, now we have this note input. Okay, perfect. Now let's think about this. We want, well, there's 2 things that we want. We want an input that takes in text, and we want a button. So let's first actually just make those. Input, and then we have a button that I'm just going to call it save. Okay, so nothing is being done to them, but that's just what we have so far. Now this comes a little bit, let me just commit these. Added input and button need to implement. Okay, so now comes more of the challenging part. So this is very important. So let's first just worry about this Y. It's our input, but let's just call it Y. So Y is what sort of stores what the user is typing, okay? Now, what we can do is there's two things we need to worry about. So here, I've taken the, let's call it field input, which is this field, right? So the field input. And here, we're going to just say the value equals the field input. And what that means is that this value is the value that we are displaying here. Okay, so this will be more clear very shortly. Now, I want to make a function here called update input. This will be, it'll be clear why I think first I'll write it out and then I'll explain what's happening. There's two things I need to do. I need to pass in this input. And then I need to have a function here. Update field input. Parameter. I'll explain this as soon as I implement it. So what I'm doing is I have the input basically that keeps track of what the user is typing here. I have that in the app. And I'm going to pass that down into this input component, the child, the input component. And that is actually what I'm going to set the value of this to. Okay, but another clear, very important thing is that here, this input field, I set the value to field input, and then there's also another attribute, on change. On change, I'm going to call this function that is existing in the parent that I've passed down, okay? Every time some change is detected here, it's going to be calling this, this function that I'm passing in as a parameter. Now that function exists here. It's this update. This is the function that I pass into here. And this is the function that is actually going to be called every time there's a change detected here. Change can be like, basically it's typing into it. And so maybe let's just see if this is working. So first, this is just sort of, notice here that I don't actually declare like, here, I don't need to actually declare that there is a parameter. Show the two programs. Oh, of course, let's do that. Let's actually, let me shrink this even more and close that. Let me shrink that. Okay. Very cool. Okay. So notice here I have this E. So you might be thinking like, why do I have it here? But then I don't have it here, and I don't even have it here. I don't really need to worry about it there. So that is just something that's built into this on change. So because detecting a change is an event, right? Remember in the HTML CSS, when you were adding event listeners, you had to like do .add event listener, and then it sort of had the event built in. It's similar to this. This on change already has the event. We don't need to, the first parameter is just going to be this event. We don't need to actually worry about that. Because if I console log this, event E, okay? Now let's actually open these DevTools. Let's log this. I just type something. Every time I type something, it is printing this event, okay? Or even easier, we have detected a change. Refresh that. Every time I'm typing something, it's detecting changes as I type in this input. So far, 67 changes, okay? Does anyone have any questions so far about what I've just done? Where I have a function here and I'm passing it in, and then I'm also passing in this state. I think this will be more relevant very soon. But I think the most important thing is this idea. I declare a function in the parent, I pass it down to the child, and I'm essentially adding it as an event listener on the input, that function. Because I'm saying on change, on any change that's detected on this input, call this function. So please, yeah, if anybody has any questions, please do write them down. Or if you want me to re-explain anything, do let me know. Of course. So I will explain. All right, so I'll explain both of those. I'm actually going to start with update input because I think that the field input will become more relevant very soon, okay? So here at this level, all the update input is doing is it takes an event, it prevents default action, so we can worry about that later, but let's just say this is a standard practice, okay? But I think it's more important that we have this parameter, the event, okay? So this update input, I am passing this function is being passed as a prop, as a parameter, it's being passed into the child input. So is that idea clear? When I do this, I'm basically saying this, I guess for lack of a better term, this prop or this parameter, update field input, is going to take the value update input, which is a function, this function. So this function is being passed into the child component. Is that idea clear of us passing a function down? Okay, perfect. Now here, maybe if I add a space there, it'll be clear. In this input field, I can add an event listener by just doing this on change. I don't need to do any of this document.find the thing and add event listener like that. I can just directly, using this attribute on change, add an event listener. What this means is that on change, every time a change is detected on this input field, I want to call this function, or I want to do whatever in here. Basically, it's not necessarily calling a function, but it's just saying do whatever is in here every time I do this on change, okay? I could change that, but for now, let's think of it that on change, it's just saying do whatever is in here. Now, when I write update field input here, it's the same parameter I'm passing in. And because here I pass in a function update input, then on change, this bit, what this means is it's going to call the function update input on change. It might even be easier. I'm going to replace that with update. It's much shorter. I think I just broke it. Let me see. What did I break? Update on change. What's going on? Oh, I need to save that. So is that idea clear so far of the fact that I'm passing in a function to the child, and then on change, this is sort of just built in, on change, I'm calling that function every time it detects a change on the input. For sure, line 20. Okay. So this line 20 is just saying that I want this input component to be here, and what the input component is doing is that it is taking in two parameters, field input and update. The field input is just y. It's just, right now it's an empty string, and we'll go into why we want that to be actually passed in. And then this update is going to be a function. This update input, it's a function that we're passing in that we get access to here. So the reason why, and we'll get into why we pass the value and why it's important, but just, is that idea, is line 20 clear so far? Just like what this is doing? Okay, perfect. So now let's get into why, like, why are we even passing this value? That's a good question. It doesn't make sense, but there's a reason. And the reason is because we want to update this state, right? Because notice how here this value is the field input. This, and the field input is just y. So I'm passing down y, and I'm putting y, I'm setting y as what is inside this input as we type. But the thing is that on change, we call this update function, yes. But the state y only exists in the parent. And that's why we actually we pass down this function so that in the child, every time a change is detected, we call that function, and actually it's sort of hidden from us, but what's happening is it's passing in the event. And inside the event, we actually have the value. So let's do that. So I believe to access it, I think it's that. And let's see here how this works. So I just typed in E, I just typed in H. Now I'm going to type in E. Now I'm going to type in L, another L, and an O. So now see sort of what it's doing. Basically, I'm passing in a function from the parent, this update input, into the child. Every time a change is detected, it's going to send that event, that on change event, back up to the parent. It's going to call this function, and it's just it's sort of like it sends the event up, essentially. And now we sort of have access to that. Yes, Sumina, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted Okay, so there are two input. There are two values of input. One is the field input, one is the update. The field input is the y, and the update is the update input function. Is that what it is?
Exactly, yes.
Okay. And this is what is going over here through it and getting processed. Okay.
Exactly. So it's like this function, we're passing it down the child so that what we've declared here is called every time that there is a change that's detected. The change is just on this field, this input, this text input. So again, if I type in hello, if I type in H, a change has been detected. So it calls that. And then if I type in E, another change. And then L, and then O, right? So these are all changes. Yes, so Y is still empty. So now it's sort of, now we get to like what Y is doing. So we get that, okay. Now what we do is, let me actually, right, 1 second, I need to see, we should just check. Okay, well, it's okay, we still have time. It's okay if we go a bit over just because I think this concept is very important. So what we're gonna do is, let's actually, instead of just console logging it, let's grab this. And then let's say set So it's going to be our new value. And we're going to get it from that target. And then now we're going to set y to this value that we're getting. And now what does everyone think is going to happen? Now what we're doing is, notice here that every time a change is detected, we call that okay. So we grab our new value from the event, which is basically from inside the input, we grab that, and we're setting y to that value. But again, remember, this y that I set here, that I update, I'm passing it in here as y. And that's what this is. Now, if I do this, let's just ignore that. If I type in H, oh, now I actually have HELLO. Right? Yes, Samina, do you have a question? I see your hand is raised. So, okay, maybe from before, for sure. Okay, does anyone have any questions about this? Sort of like why this is displaying hello? Exactly. So this value is just going to be from the parent. It's passed down, but it's also updated on every change. Exact, for sure. So maybe I can, okay, so this class name, this is not really relevant. This is just like, I think in, you know, in HTML, we just do that. It's just the same as that, but it's just a different sort of format in React. We have to, in JSX, we have to actually call it that instead of just saying class. I'm not sure why, but I think that's just a syntax thing. Yes, Hannah, I see you have a question.
Why we did not pass the function right away to the value? Why we did all this?
This update input function?
Yes, why we did not pass it to the value right away? So it's gonna already type it on the screen.
Like having here set, oops.
No. In the value, just call the function. Instead of, like, I don't have on change, just value equal the function update input. So every time.
Right, so the reason we can't do that is because this on change is an event listener that's built into the input. So it has to be like on change, something has to be updated on change. And every time it detects you type a change, then it calls a function that updates what's being displayed. It's sort of specific to how React handles how it's showing the information to us.
Mm-hmm. But if I pass it to the value, it's gonna give me an error.
Sorry, like what do you mean passing here?
Like the function, the update input, this function, I just pass the value to the this name. I just pass it to the value directly. Like
how would you detect the user then typing in the change or typing in something, right? So then that's the thing, because then you have to somehow then detect, like, how is the user going to update the, like, basically field when they type things in, right? So that's sort of just, it's a different way of doing it. It's the React way. I remember in HTML, you know how you would add event listeners. So you would like grab your input, right?
Yeah.
And then you need to add an event listener that probably is updating it as it's typed, or something along those lines, right?
Like this function gonna take letter by letter on change?
Exactly. It's taking letter by letter as we change it.
Okay,
and that's why I
Oh.
can do this. That's why I can do hello, and then I can remove it, or I can just say, John Doe, and I can sort of also remove it. So it's quite responsive in that sense. Yeah.
So how
It's-
can I read the whole string together?
Okay, so reading the whole string, that's a good point. So now we're getting to now it's like when we click save.
Okay.
Now
Okay.
it's right because we already know that maybe here I can put it if I console.log the y here, maybe will it show me the whole string? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Notice now it's showing the whole string up to the point before the last setting, because I think this is not done, like there is probably a slight delay. But if I do a space, then now I see that. So now we can see the whole string because we're setting it.
Okay. So set y, it's like appending to the y.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, got
I'm
it.
because I think what happens is that in this event, like in this input on change, it takes whatever is inside of this and then calls this. So then in this event object, this e.target.value has what we have written so far. And it's just setting, it's not appending it. So it's actually replacing the value of y. That's what it's doing. It's replacing the value of y with a new value. And that's actually I will put some videos that explain why you actually want to do something like that. Whenever you set the state, you actually just put a new value in the state. You don't modify existing values.
But once you cancel it, it's showing the whole string for y. So it's like appending it to the y, right? It's not if it's
not
related.
quite. Because notice that this, so maybe we can think of it in terms of, so when I write H, I detect, so I guess we can ignore that, but it will always be one behind. But basically when I write something, it calls this on change and it console logs, yeah, so it calls this on change is detected. It calls update and it gets the value from this thing, which is just going to be H, but we won't actually see it here just because of how this is sort of delayed. Maybe I can.
Can you cancel next to the y, set y, like y and set y together?
You mean before it, or
after
you mean consoling set y?
Yeah, like y, comma, set y.
Sure, let's do that. I think set y is a built-in thing, but we can take a look at what it looks like. For sure. So if I type in H, yeah, there's a lot of whoops, what was that? Set y is built into this use state. It's sort of, it handles updating y.
Oh.
And so that's why there's all this like stuff going on here. Yeah, see now it's H. But what is actually happening internally is that we're grabbing the whole string from this input, and then we're setting the value of y to that whole string. So first it's H, and then the next time it's HE, and we set HE to y, and then the next time it's HEL, and we set HEL to y. It's like that.
Okay.
Okay, so I hope that, because I see another question here about clarifying the difference between y and set y. So I hope that clarified that. But if it didn't, do let me know, and I can also explain that in a bit more detail as well. Yeah, so set y is built in. How it modifies that. Okay, so y is just the variable itself in the state. Set y is a built-in method that we get access to for how to update y. So that's just the difference. Y is the variable itself. Set y is what we use to update. Notice here, I do not do this. Do not do this. I do not do this. I do this. Oops. There's a very specific reason why we're not doing that, but I think we'll get into that next week, why we're not allowed to do that. Exactly. So you have to use the setters. The setters are very, very important. You have to use these setters to properly update the variables. Exactly. Or properly update the state. Did that clarify so far? Anyone has any questions so far on where we are? We're actually very close to. Do you mean so? Yeah, so okay, so why didn't I update the variable right away? What do you mean by why I didn't update it right away? Do you mean like the why? Okay, so do you mean why don't I? Yes, but like where? Where am I updating? Where should I be updating? Do you think?
So basically line 10 is actually y is equal to space, like initializing y. That's what it is.
Exactly. I'm just saying it's going to be an empty string.
Yeah, an empty string. Okay.
I just see a question here. The why I didn't update the variable right away. I'm just curious, like where, feel free to unmute and just let me know, like where might I have, should I have updated that? Okay, line 15. Okay, for sure. So this variable. Line 15. So do you mean like doing this? Why didn't I do that? Or
Yes.
do you mean okay? That is a very specific, there's a reason to do with React. That is, if I start doing this, it'll actually break my application. So we'll go into that next week, why we're not allowed to do this. That's why we have to use these built-in functions they give us, the set y, to update the value. So that's just a very React specific reason as to why we're not allowed to do that. Yeah. Because again, React is extremely complex. There's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes that are sort of hidden from us in terms of how it's going about sort of updating the display that we see. But that's a good question.
So set y is something that like we are initializing or setting a value for that element. But the use state is for use state over here is also for initializing, and over here again you're using in line number 6 use state you're putting it in an array, like so this is you're initializing an array with these elements.
Exactly. So use state is just, it's what we call a hook, but I think it's more important. Just use state is just saying that I want this to be a state. And when I do that, then I have to pass in between these two brackets, I need to pass in what I want the starting state to be for X here. And so it's going to start as a string. And then for Y, I want the starting, when I'm going to use state, and I want it to start as an empty string.
Can you just repeat what was the state?
So when I use state, basically, when I do something like this, when I do something like this, I'm just saying that I want X to be initialized to be basically a state, and I want it to start as what I pass between this use state brackets. I want the initial starting value of X to be an array with these two strings. And then also with that, when I do this use state, this is just the syntax of how I set it up, how I initialize, how I set it up. That's just sort of how React, it's built in, is that this set X, that's the method that I have to modify X. And so it's just the syntax of how React is handling state and declaring a state and also initializing the state. So this, not only is this declaring that X is the state, and I use set X to modify that state, but it's also initializing the state to be this array with these two values inside of it. Okay, so I hope that clarified the idea of me using state. The user given data is changing the Y state. Yes. Yes. So every time we type in something, we call this update on change. And then from the update, like inside of that, in this input, we can grab the value of the entire field. And that's what new value becomes. And then when I do set Y, I just update Y to that value. So when I do set Y and I pass this in, I'm just changing the value of Y to what I've passed in. It's not setting it from, well, it's modifying it from whatever it initially was. When I do this, you can just think of this, that this is sort of just an initial setup. Yeah. Oh, of course. Yeah, it does take time. It's not I think when I first learned this, it took me like weeks or it took like quite a while. Definitely not one lecture. But I think, yeah, it is complex, but I think over time you will see that it makes things so much simpler because you don't need to worry about like adding event listeners with documents. You don't need to like use ID to grab things. Like you can probably already notice that. Imagine building this just using HTML and CSS. It would probably take a lot longer in terms of the amount of code that you need to write, right? And like the script files as well, you need to like grab these fields, and you would also need to like modify. You would need to add new list items to a div every time, right? Like there's a lot of complex, there are more moving parts without React. Yeah, so it does simplify the code. It is something, yeah, there's a lot to remember, but of course, it's just, you just do, practice over time. What I can do is, because this week's assignment is not actually in React, I will actually, when the lab for today, I will update that I'll put some practice exercises in, or I'll link to some practice exercises, and we can take a look at what that looks like. Yeah. Sure. Console.log, current value of Y, new value to set to. All right, let's take a look at that. Interesting. Okay, wait. Let's just. All right, interesting. So there's no current value. Okay, wait, maybe. To set it to. Okay. So I put an H. I think now it's more clear, like, because before there was like a delay in terms of how quickly it's setting it. So now if I put H, current value is empty. The new value to set it to is H. Now it does update. Yeah, initially, just because, yeah, so it will update. So the next time when I type in E, it says the current value is H. The new value I'm setting it to is HE, L, L, O. Okay, so that's what's happening when I print it. Yeah.
So why I need Y? I just read the targeted value. Why I need Y in this situation if I want to read the input?
So do you mean like why
I use the use state? I can just use this function and retrieve the new value.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So the reason why we do that, and this is more specific to React, is that we want this value to exist up here, because remember, our notes exist at this level, and we want to be updating our notes with that value that we have typed in.
Our notes.
hello from France, hello from Canada. So
Okay.
Yeah.
But the input, it's a bit confusing, to be honest.
okay, that's okay. I will also upload these codes, and I think with the there are also some videos in the lab and like documentation. And of course, we will be going more into like why it'll be more clear like why we do it this way, because it would be a good exercise, like actually try removing it and try maintaining the functionality without it. I mean, it's certainly there are other ways to implement this, but this is sort of just, I guess, I mean, these questions you're asking are really good, and I definitely think when I first started React, I think I had similar questions, or like I was doing it in similar ways. And I think with enough time as I practiced it, it's sort of, you will sort of pick up on habits of doing things in a way that sort of React sort of forces you to do it in that way. And that's something that will be picked up on over time. And it's why just by default, I just have it like this. Yeah, so it's something, it's definitely with time, but it's good to ask those questions because now I'm thinking like, yeah, why can't we do it like that? Okay, perfect. So x, set x, y, set y. All right, so now we're on the home stretch. So we have our last little bit here. Is this working? Yes, it is. Okay, good. So now we have one thing remaining to do. We need to update our notes. So let's just add this here. Added a function to update our field input. Okay, so now let's add our final function. And it's just going to be add note. Again, we're going to do prevent default. This is just a standard practice. We'll go more into, I can go in future lectures, I can go more into this, but for now, I'll just say that sometimes doing certain things has like a default action where something will happen when you click a button. Like it might actually refresh the page, but we don't want that to happen. So we just do this prevent default. Any default behavior associated with an event listener is prevented. Okay, so we're going to add the note here. Okay, so here, I'm going to just do that. Okay. There's one more parameter we need to pass into this child. And I'm going to call it click action. And maybe that gives a hint of like what this is actually doing, this click action. So this click action is going to exist here. Okay. And what this is basically taking in is this function add note. And remember how I mentioned how like every time you click save, we probably wanted to save the note. So now, you know, we can just next to this button, if we just type in on click, exactly, it's going to be an event listener. Well, it's going to be something that is called during an event. So the event listener, oops, this should be click action. My bad. So the event listener is actually this on click. That's the event listener on click. On click, do this. And this click action is a function that is being passed into this input. It's this function, add note. This is being passed into here, into click action. And then next to this button on click, we will do the click action. We'll call this function. It's very similar to what we did with this update. And check this out. So in this add note, I'm just going to console log clicked. Okay, and if I hit that, right, notice how it's actually, it's doing something. It's calling, it's console logging. So now the click is doing something. And I think we can actually see here, if I type on, these are all built-in event listeners. So now instead of doing, document.add event listener, this is how in React you would add event listeners, or more specifically, you can associate some functionality with an event listener. What we've done here, we've added this event listener on click. We're calling this function click action. Okay. Perfect. So now, okay, so is that clear for everybody? Just like what I did there with the click action, how I pass in the add note, and then here on click, I call that click action. And so it's basically saying, I want this function to run every time I click the button. Okay, perfect. All right, so now it's probably, when we add this note, now we're thinking, we want to update the notes, okay? So remember, this Y actually stores the value. So all we need to really do, we set X. We set X to our new value. How do we do that? So I'm going to use something. What I'm going to do is this. We'll go into more about why I write it like this. Like, why don't I just do, you're probably thinking, why don't I just do this, right? Well, does everybody understand what this is doing? Right? I'm just taking the array and I push the value of Y into that array. So this is actually, we're not supposed to do it like this, because what this is doing is it's taking this X dot push Y. Let me see here. JavaScript return open loop. Well, first of all, this doesn't return a new array. So what we actually want to do, we can declare a new array, or this is our updated array. And again, it's the same thing here. We want to set it to a new value, not the old one. So I'll just declare a new array, updated, and I'll just say, well, it's actually going to be complicated to do it like that. Okay, so we will need to use, let's do it here, updated array. So there's a special syntax here. What this means, when I do something like this with these 3 dots with a new array, I'm basically saying, create a new array, and then the 3 dots next to the X, it's just taking all the values of the old array and just like getting rid of the square brackets around it. So it's just, this is basically going to be all the values of the old array plus this new value of Y. That's all it's doing. And it's saying that basically make a new array with the value of Y added to it. So the reason why I don't use x.pushY is because x.pushY, yes, it updates X, but x.pushY it doesn't return anything that we need. And of course, also, if I do x.pushY, that's updating X directly. It's kind of like me just doing this, which is not actually allowed. We'll go into why that's not allowed next week. So I create a new array with the value of Y added to it and all the old values inside of X. And then I set X to that updated array. Okay, now let's try this. So let's say hello from, let's save. Oh, now that is there, that note is there. Now also, I don't like having this here, so I'm also just going to say set Y to an empty string. So now if I do that, hello from Italy. There we are. So now it adds that note there. All right, does anyone have any questions so far on like sort of how we went about that?
So you updated the you added the y, and then you updated the x, set x to the updated array. So x is now the new updated array. Then you set y is to empty string, and that y disappeared. So
Exactly.
the y disappeared. So the thing that is being displayed is x or y. Because
So
x was
here
the
I'm displaying X, the notes are being displayed, and then the Y is what is inside the input field that's being displayed. And so
oh
when I set it to empty, it just gets rid of that.
okay, so it's basically cleaning up that. But there was a hello from Spain. Where did that go? How did you?
Oh, I think whenever you refresh, so there's no persistence based, like, yes, it is a state to keep track of things, but whenever you refresh, it just sort of starts over from this like initial thing. There's no persistence in the sense of things being saved across browser sessions. Every time I refresh, it's like a new browser session. That's why it gets rid of the old note.
Oh,
And that's something in the future we will look into trying to fix.
oh, okay. Okay.
No worries. It is definitely a new language. But it does take time, but I think you can already see, like, you can probably already tell, like, I guess you can, I mean, if you agree with me, type in yes. If you don't, type in no. But like, would you say that this, in terms of the amount of code we're writing, is a lot less than how you might want to write it if you just did it in HTML and CSS and JavaScript, if you did not use React? Yeah, it is cooler. And you know, the styling, I didn't even get into styling, but the styling is a lot simpler because you can literally just have the styles in each component. It's okay. It will take time, but it is more complicated now. But as things get more and more complicated in terms of building things, you'll see why React just makes it so much simpler. Because I mean, you know, it's funny when I was lecturing you guys on the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, I felt like that was so much more complicated because I had to like relearn that using the documents and adding event listeners that way. And I found that a lot more complicated than React. So it's interesting. Awesome. So let's, for sure. So this line 20 here, what this is doing is, this is specific to how React handles things, is that we want to set the value to a new thing. That's what I'm doing here. I create a new array and then I set X to that new array. Now this bit, what this bit is doing is it's basically saying, this dot X, it's just saying take all the values to X of X and then add Y to it. And then that's going to be a new array. Absolutely. So let's console.log that. Let's console.log that and see what that gives us. Test here. That's what dot gives us. It's basically just all the values, but it's a new array. It's not the same one. It's a new array. So if I do this, and then I'm just going to also console.log X, and I just want to show that this does not, doing this, like this does not change what X is. Oops. I'm going to type in test. So the first console log will be hello from France, hello from Canada, and test. The second one will just be hello from France, hello from Canada. Exactly. Or what is this hello? Why did I get hello? Oh, oops. Yes. Okay, so the first log will have hello from France, hello from Canada, and this hello. And then the second one will just do the hello from France and hello from Canada. So I'm just showing that this is not doing this is not modifying the array that we already have. It's just sort of making a new one. It's making a copy. So if I add a note, I don't even need to have that, honestly. I just need to click this. Notice that the first thing is this, and then the second thing is this. And so this basically lets us create a new array. That's what line 20 is doing. It's just saying, create a new array with ... x, all the previous values of x, and just add y at the end of that. And that's going to be a new array. Okay, perfect. So let's add that in. I'm going to get commit, and I'll say full implementation, but need to add some stuff. Okay. Does anyone have any questions before we take our break? So the thing is, it's a great question. Using push, it might not give us an error right now, but React has a very special way of handling updating state. And we basically have to create, if the state is an array, like in the case of X, we want to create a new array with our changes, and then we set that state to that value. The thing is, if you don't use that, and you have like many things happening in state, eventually something will break and something will really bad will happen. This is just how React handles the re-renders, and it's something we will cover it in the future. So it's a concept called state and lifecycle. And React has its own sort of internal handling of how it updates state and how it re-renders all the display. Yeah, we cannot do set x dot push y, because set x is we cannot use it like that, because set x is just it's just saying set state action. So we just put the new value that we want to set x to inside of the set x. We can almost think of it like a function, set x, and then you pass the new value of x inside of the set x. So I don't know if because I think if I tried to do that, it would probably give an error. I mean, I can see what happens. It's always good to test these out. Yeah, so it's not actually we have to do it in this way. And it'll be more clear in the future. We'll have future lectures that cover this concept. Okay, so let's take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 10:50. And there are a few things before the lab. So at 10:50, when we come back from our break, there are a few things I have to go over. And I think everybody who's here definitely do stay during the lab, because there are a few things we're going to go over regarding your group presentations and the assignment. Yeah, so right now it's 10:40, so we'll be back in 10 minutes, and then there's some announcements we need to make, and then we'll start our lab. I will pause the recording, and then I'll restart it when we come back from our break. All right, so let's come back to our lecture. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so there's 3 things we're going to talk about before we get into our lab. The first thing is course requirements for graduation. So people have been asking us what are the requirements for graduating from this course, and receiving the sort of digital supercluster certificates. So we'll get into that. We'll also talk about information regarding presentations next week. So how you can sort of, if the project is complete and your group is ready, you guys can request, you can book a slot for the presentations. We'll talk about that. And then we'll also talk about the assignment that we're going to assign today. That will be due 2 weeks from now. So let's get into those three things. So first things up, course requirements for graduation. So this criteria, this is just from the homepage. So I'll actually go back to the homepage. Right here, graduation criteria. And so this is sort of our rubric about how we perform the evaluation. So out of a total of 100%, 20% of your grade is going to be the labs, which earlier it was, remember, like the code, but now we've changed it to those quizzes that are based on completion. You can take them as many times as you want until the due date, of course. And so these are graded on completion. And then we also have, of course, the assignments. So these include the past assignments, but from now on, it'll be one assignment that's assigned every week. And so that's going to be 40% of the total grade. And these are graded on completion, correctness, and style. Okay. And then what we finally are going to have are the projects. So the project we just had, like the HTML, CSS, that stuff that we've been working on, that is one example of a project, but in future, there will be more projects assigned. And so the group projects, these are 40% of your total grade. Again, these are graded on completion, correctness, style, documentation, and so on. So, you know, the specifics of what each requirement, what each assignment requires and what each project requires, those are specified, of course, in the, the actual bit that talks about them. Like, for instance, for assignments, it was just, or even better, maybe let's first look at group project. So this guy here. So here, is all the details and actually how many marks this individual project is, right? But the idea here, what this means, 40%, is that all the projects taken together will be 40% of your total grade. And then all the assignments taken together will be 40% of your total grade. All the labs will be 20%. And to pass this course and to receive the certificate, you must complete all labs, assignments, and projects, and you must obtain an average score of at least 80% across all of these. So a combined total for all of them should sort of accumulate to 80%. And then if the score is below target, there is an option you can apply the feedback that we give for, these labs, these assignments, these projects. And of course, you can make changes and then submit a revised version to be reevaluated. Okay, so does anyone have any questions on grading criteria? Okay, awesome. Yep. Right, so if you can't complete on time, I think, depending on the circumstance, we can provide extensions. So yeah, so do email support@codingincolor.org if you cannot complete the assignment on that time. Because right now we have 3 cohorts. So we have one that started in September 15th. We have one that started 2 weeks after, and then we have another one that started 4 weeks after. So, we can make some adjustments in terms of how, which cohort we assign you to, and that will give more time. But do email support@codingincolor and let us know the circumstances. Okay, perfect. So if there are no more questions on that, we can talk about project presentations. Okay. So project presentation. So this has to do with like presenting our the details regarding presenting the project. So you can find this actually if you go to home and then you scroll all the way to the bottom here, group project 1. Under this module, you can also see here project presentation guidelines. And so here we have some details on how to submit the project. So we want you to, like, we know you guys are in groups. So here in this section here, you will, well, I mean, in the student view, yeah, you can start the assignment here. And what we want is, wait, where did that go? My bad. Let me go back to that. Let's the student view. We haven't actually published that yet. That's why it's not, can't see it. Oh no, we have, okay. Project presentation guidelines, right? So here where you'd start the assignment, we want you guys to put the GitHub link for your project. And of course the deadline, that'll be different depending on which sort of group you're in. And yeah, feel free to email us regarding time extensions. Make sure the repository is public when you send it here, and that ensure all your team members' contributions are documented in the README and through the commit history. So if there are some things that the commit history are not in the commit history, please update the README to specify like who did what if it's not quite clear based on the commit history. And then we also want you to deploy it. So we did mention, we went over how to deploy something using GitHub Pages. So I would actually probably recommend GitHub Pages. It's the most straightforward one to use. And make sure that in the same submission that has your GitHub link, you also provide the link to the live website. And so please do that. Okay. Also presentation booking. So when you present the project to us, you'll have to use sort of this to book a time slot. And so there's some more like details here regarding when these will be held, but basically we're holding them during lab time. So over here, you can book a time for your presentation. You can select the date here and then the time and then like name, email. So whoever's booking will book for the whole group. And then, yeah, here, whoever is doing the booking, please have one person per group do the booking. So all you guys will sort of speak to each other, pick a time. And here, you can put the group number and also who's in the group as well. But the group number alone should be sufficient. So live link on the website, that is, we had a lecture on GitHub Pages. So you can find that lecture in the recordings. And we did go over, in there, we went over like how to do that. I think also once I'm done going over these, I'll try to find that and I'll attach that lecture to this like here. I'll link it. Yeah. I'll actually look for it and I'll link that. Let me write that down. Okay, so I'll remember to do that as soon as we finish. Okay, so the presentation of it will be 10% of the grade of the total assignment. So you'll be assessed on things like clarity, depth of understanding, teamwork, and the ability to speak about the contributions that you've made to the project. So those are all will be factored into the grade for the project. So 10% of the grade of the project will actually be the presentation. And yeah, so there's a little bit more about expectations, why this matters, and also on contribution verification. So we will be trying to, each student, yes, definitely discuss the contributions. Please put that in the README. And then, we will be looking into, if you say you contributed something, we do want some evidence for that. So if it's in the commit history or in the README. Yeah. Great question. So I think that like it's during lab time, and I think it could be in front of other students. You know, if other students want to drop in and take a look, definitely there certainly can be other students there as well. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, good. So this is a good question about tracking percentage. So the thing is, because I don't think these grades here properly actually represent the grades that you see there do not properly represent the actual grade that you have, because like, how do I put it? Maybe I can annotate here. So if, let's say, you have a lab worth 6 marks, and yeah, let's say you get 6 out of 6 on the lab. This is a lab. And then you have 3 out of 3 on the assignment. And then you have maybe 2 out of 2. Well, okay, that you'll just be getting 100%, but let's just make this 2 out of 3 on the assignment, and then project, this is 1 out of 2. The actual calculation of the total will be different from like how we consider the actual calculation. So it would be like this, and I guess I hope this is not wrong, but the actual total, so because this 6 is only accounting for, yeah, it's going to be weighted. So like this 6 will actually be, let's see here, I think it'll be like 1.2, 20% of that, and then this 3 will count for 40% of the total. So what, it will be like 1.4 or something, and this will be 40%. This will be like maybe 0.9 or something. So it'll be a new total will be calculated there, and then this will also be multiplied. So this will be like 1.2 plus some new total. So it won't, the grades that you have on the grades, just assume that everything counts for the same. So that's, yeah, it is a weighted. Yeah, I don't like math either. I don't think I did that calculation correctly. But yeah, we will collectively, I think all the instructors together, we will calculate that. We can update that and we can show that to you. Alrighty. So I think that is clear. So now does anyone have any more questions about the presentation guidelines here? I will put a link. I'll find the lecture and I'll put the link up here. But presentations. So for the people who finish by Friday, well, end of today, presentations start next week. So the 6th, yeah. Right. So the reason why we don't have marks for attendance is just because a lot of people have different schedules. So it's really tough for them to try to attend all the lectures. Yeah. Yeah. So presentations will be during lab time. Okay. Awesome. So, okay. So now that is, yes. So we want the link to the GitHub and the live link to whatever service you're using to deploy the application that you've built. So GitHub Pages, I would recommend that because we did cover that, and I can just put a link here to that video, so I'll put that in after. Okay, so yeah, so in terms of documented through commit history, maybe I can show that here. If I go to my GitHub and let's go to this coding color. Notice that here you can click commits and you can see commit history in terms of who sort of committed what code. And that's actually why we were saying it's very important that you use GitHub to make the changes that you do, right? Because we will be looking into that. Now, we understand that it's a bit difficult to do that at time, especially like starting in. So if it's not explicitly stated through commit history, please do. Yeah, that's okay. So please do document in the README who did what and who contributed what. And also, if it's not in the commit history, please do specify what is not in the commit history in the README. So that's very important. In the README, then describe exactly what everyone did and why it's not in the commit history, like what commits would be missing. Because I do understand that. Like sometimes a bunch of people would work together, come up with code, and then have one person commit that to the GitHub. So technically, it looks like only one person did it, but in actuality, everybody worked on it. So if that did happen in certain places, mention that. But please try to be as clear as possible in the README about those contributions. Yeah. Yeah, it is definitely, yeah, it's teamwork. Yes, so we can access the public shared repo and we will be able to read this README and see that. So it's very important. In the README, please do document exactly the contributions. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so I see for people who took help from ChatGPT, please reference exactly which code was taken from ChatGPT. And I think the important thing is understand every line of that code and be able to explain it exactly what it's doing and how it's integrated into your project. You don't need to have wireframes. Yeah, let's just see here. I do not believe wireframes are needed. Let me actually, yeah, there's no need to have wireframes, but please do in the README. Very like thoroughly document contributions and who did what. Yeah. Sure. I mean, if you already did wireframes, you're absolutely free to add those in. Yeah, there's no issue with that. Okay, so any other questions about the project presentations or any clarifications? Yeah, so in the README, the README is just to, ideally the commit history will show exactly who did what, but just in case that I understand, like we understand that people are new to GitHub and so there might be some issues with, you know, how that was handled, so that's okay. But please do in the README then, if that's the case, that the commit history doesn't really have everything, in the README, please do be very thorough in terms of describing who did what and why certain things are not in the commit history and like what it should be. Yeah. So if you did take some code from ChatGPT, in the files itself, please add comments specifying that like where the code was taken from ChatGPT, and like be able to, for the code that was taken, be able to thoroughly understand what was taken and how like it's integrated in your project. So be able to understand and explain all of that code that you have taken from ChatGPT, if it's from ChatGPT. And yeah. Okay, so all right, so let's now that that's covered, let's talk about our today's assignment.
So the whole thing, the 10 minutes is for the entire team. It's ideally split evenly between team members. Yes. So each team member will present their portion. Now I understand there are some like circumstances where like some teams have fewer people or maybe even one person, and like we understand if that's the case, like we know who you are and like that it's we're very flexible with that, so that's okay, don't worry about that. But yeah, there'll be a 10-minute presentation, so it'll be split evenly between team members, and then we'll also have a 10-minute Q&A. So every presentation will take 20 minutes. So each group will take 20 minutes of allotted time. And that's why we're having y'all book a 20-minute time slot here in this link, okay? And remember, it's one booking per team. So ideally you guys meet together and decide on a time and sort of book that time, right? So only one team member should book that time slot. Probably, yeah. So if there are like four people per team, then yes, it might be like 2.5 minutes or something along those lines. Yeah. It's up to you guys will to decide, like, I guess ideally each person in the team will be presenting their component that they worked on. So it's up to you guys to decide like who presents first and sort of the order in which it's done to present the whole project, okay? Please do read, like we just sort of went very briefly over the whole thing, but please do read this in detail. It is on the home page, right? So if people are not available at the same time, that's understandable. I guess you can pick a time that works best for the most number of people on your team then. Because yeah, we understand that like not everybody will be available at the same time, but try to, you know, definitely in the times, in these sort of times available, definitely try to find a time that sort of can work for everybody. But if it's not for everybody, then at least for the largest number of people can be there. Yeah. So I'm not okay. So about potentially making a video, but I'm not sure. That's something that we'll actually have to talk about, if that is a possible thing. I think actually we want you there in person so we can ask questions. We will ask questions. Yeah, so everybody will be asked about their part. So yeah, so us instructors will ask each of you about your individual contributions. And like, yeah. And I think, so regarding the video, we actually want you guys to be there so we can ask these questions. And so, yeah, do try to find a time that works for the most number of people. And if one person's not able to be there, just let us know. You can email support, let us know your group number, let us know the time you picked and who can be there and who can't, and we can we'll figure something out then in that case. Okay, perfect. So if those are all the questions, then I mean, we'll also have office hours today from 5 to 7. So if there are more questions, please do write them down. And just like, obviously there's like time to think about this, and then you can come back during those office hours. You can also ask us again, and I'll find out more about like what we're going to do in that case if someone cannot make it. That's something that we'll look into, but you know, do email us if that's a situation that arises. And also do think about like, are there any other questions that, you know, I might have, and then feel free to ask us those during the next office hours from 5 to 7. Okay, so with that covered, let's close these. let's talk about our assignment. So this is an assignment that we are assigning today, and it will be due 2 weeks from now. So this will be due on the 17th at, I believe, midnight on the 17th. So this is an assignment on building an API, like a web application that makes use of an API. We highly recommend, so this is an individual assignment. It's not going to be a group assignment. But we highly encourage you to chat with your teammates as you complete your own assignment. So just make sure if you are chatting with teammates, you guys are using different APIs. And so, yeah, you know, having that sort of communication, the peer support, it's a good thing to have. Yeah, you can choose the theme. It's totally up to you, but so you'll build a website using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So again, this is not React. We're using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you will pick an API from these choices here. You'll pick one API, and you'll incorporate that into your app, into this website. So you can fetch, interact with this API, and then grab data and present it. So kind of like what I did with the weather app in that example there, where I had some sort of interaction. We could click a button, we get the information, we display it. You can do something similar. Probably avoid using the weather API. Yeah, so the weather API is not actually here, so don't use that. But the concept is the same. The deadline is November 17th. Okay, so choose one API from the list below. And then so we have all the links. You can read the documentation about how it works. And then we want you to design a website in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that will use the data provided to give your users a meaningful way to interact with that API. So be creative. I even have the lecture linked where I used that. And it's just an example of how I did that. It can just be one page. Let me see here. Let me actually check pages. Yeah, so there's not, I think one page is sufficient. But the idea, we do want all these requirements to be met. And eventually what we want, yeah, so there's no fixed layout. It's an individual assignment, yeah. And so what we want you to submit is a link to your GitHub, so it'll be a text submission, a link to your GitHub repo, which please make that public. I'll actually update this, so I'll say a link to your GitHub repo, please make it public, and a link to your website. And yeah, so these are just some example APIs that you can choose. There's a bunch here. Book Finder application, implement a search and information portal using Google Books API, where users can find books, authors, and publishers. That's actually pretty neat. There's a ton of them. Currency Converter, Transport API, Pokemon Encyclopedia. So these are examples of APIs that you can read about, and you will have to incorporate that into your website with some sort of user interaction. Yeah. So it's 10 points, and then these are the requirements. So it's quite sort of open. It's not like you need to have this and you need to have a navigation bar and you need to have it's quite open in terms of the requirements we want. But as long as you build something that does have, a user interface that looks all right, functional, and allowing the user to interact with that API and get the data they want, and of course displaying that data in a meaningful way. Yes, so you can have multiple pages, but you only need one page really, because there's no requirement on the number of pages. So I think one page that just has sort of the user interaction, you know, and updates data and allows some sort of, yeah, that should be good. Okay, perfect. Then I will publish this as it is. So now everybody will be able to see it. Let me check the due dates on that. Let me actually double check due dates if I have that in correctly. Okay, perfect. All right. So now that that is there, all right, so I will also upload, like this video will be uploaded so you can see like the explanation for that, but yeah. Now mobile screen, I mean, it's up to you. You can choose, if you want it to be app size, if you want it to be website size, that's totally up to you. You can even make it responsive, like whether it changes. We're more lenient on the CSS, yeah. But basically everything here is written. So also if you missed out on that, you can either watch the video when it's uploaded or sort of read these requirements, or, you know, definitely you can do both. Yeah, I think making it responsive is pretty good because it's a good exercise to like learn to get better at CSS, is to like make it responsive with how the widths change. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So now that that is done, I'll just talk about the lab, a little bit about the lab. So okay. So let's talk about the lab. Well, we're basically out of time for the lab, but we do have, there's the weekend. So this is sort of also kind of like a weekend assignment as well. There's no like code, it's just, there's a quiz to do. But before you do the quiz, these are some really good videos. I highly recommend watching this. So this guy is great here. Fun function. The playlist that I've linked, you only need to watch the first two videos here, but this is a review of the JavaScript callback functions. So map, for each, and some of those. So I think the ones that you need to worry about are just in these first two videos. And I've specified that here, only first two videos of the playlist, okay? There's a longer React lecture, I think, and this is pretty good as well. So you can, in addition to rewatching the recording when it comes up, you can also definitely watch this video as well. Either or, it's totally up to you. It's just, I think the benefit of this one is it sort of breaks it down by, there's timestamps there. And we don't have timestamps yet, but we will be adding timestamps as fast as possible. For sure, yeah. So I have the link to the videos is on this lab. Okay, so when I publish this lab, that'll be available. And then this third recommendation is documentation. So this is really good for just for reading. And this just goes over a tutorial for the React. Basically everything that we covered, sort of a tutorial for that as well. And this documentation, there's a lot more that's here. So you can search a bunch of concepts in React. Okay, so yeah, it might be a different environment, definitely. I think that, yeah, maybe there are other shorter videos. You could probably find them as well. But I guess the idea is just to have the conceptually sort of have it. But yeah, I think so maybe it was missing. I didn't include that, but all I really did to get the React app was I just did this command, npx create React app, and then I guess I just did like my app, and I run that in my terminal. I ran that in my You can run it in your bash terminal or in your just PowerShell or whatever terminal you use. You can run that command, and that'll create your app wherever the path of your terminal is open. Okay. All righty. Sounds good. All right, so okay, I'm going to publish this. I will add, so in the presentation and in the assignment, I'm going to add a link to the video which talks about deployment through GitHub Pages, just so you guys have that video there as well. That sort of goes into how to deploy that, because that is part of our assignment. So I just published that. I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I guess, yeah, the lab has officially started.